So Conrad's got a really interesting heritage, right? I know he was in Oz, but even his family, like he migrated from South Africa to Oz. He and I met each other in Shanghai in a sweet spot of coaching and innovation. And we were just talking about coming to the US. And it's only coming to the US we realized what a sweet spot we were in terms of developing coaching athletes. And Conrad's got a really interesting track record in tennis. And he introduced me to the tennis innovation around how they manufacture different balls for different speeds so the players can get more time on ball for rallying. And it blew my mind on that. So, Conrad, tell us a little bit about your tennis background and who you've been involved with and what you've done.
Thanks, mate. Look, it's been a great journey. I've been involved, obviously, in tennis as a player all my life. As a young kid, I guess a junior, one of the better players in Australia, and I decided early that I had a passion for coaching. So I went towards that route. I studied sports science, majored in biomechanics. And for, a couple of years, went out and played at a very low professional level, a lot of prize money, tennis and whatnot. And through that, started to get more involved with professional athletes, ended up coaching 17 years on the tour at different stages and different places. Was based in Japan for 2 years, China for 14 years. Obviously Australia, Melbourne before that was where I did everything. And I'm currently based in New Jersey, just on the border of New York, New Jersey, where we're running a massive tennis program here. And my journey has been ultimately as a player to an academic, which I absolutely love education, thrived on that whole thing. And I was, again, lucky to be in a sweet spot where I guess the tennis industry was coming out of just artistic into a science realm. And so that was right as I was coming through. And I guess I had 3-4 years being able to train both as a player and as a student and kind of get the best of both, leading to now where I'm the CEO of tennis at Centercourt Tennis Academy. We run arguably the largest high-end boutique academy up here, where we have 7 divisions. And so I'm dealing with junior level, which is what you just talked about, red, orange, green, yellow, managing that side, performance, where we have kids who are training to get to college, top colleges. And we also have the high performance side, full-time academy, where one of our players just won Wimbledon juniors. So it's going phenomenal. And we're really excited. I think that'd be the word right now.
I want to, before you step in, Scott, I really want to ping out a first question, if you don't mind. And it's about, because I know, Scott, your boys are playing soccer, football at the Barker Academy. And I've wrestled with this subject with coaches and parents and players for years. So, Conrad, where do you sit on performance versus development?
Oh, look, there is no performance without development, right? So, you've got to have just such a foundation that is so strong, stable, and able to be repeated daily for players to get through that formation period in development. And so I'm a little bit lucky, Angus, in that I've got 2 of my own children. My daughter is 7, almost 8. She's probably the best player in the Northeast up here. She wins absolutely everything, which I'm a little worried about. I think she's winning too much. And then my son, he's 9 and a half, almost 10. And he's had a lot of success, a lot of failure. So I'm right in that developmental spot. And for me, obviously, I'm very selective on the personalities that they're around, the type of people that they're exposed to. I really feel like that sets the platform for development and then for performance. So, I think I remember many years ago, Angus, you and I had a great chat when we're talking coaching philosophy, which, we can do over a few beers again, hopefully soon. But we talked a lot about something that stuck in my mind, and it's just being able to strip back and rebuild and strip back and rebuild. And all of that is based on, building blocks, right? So I feel like those building blocks are put in place, especially in my sport, between the ages of sort of 9 and 12. We find the players that come through those years and then excel quickly, they were even in great programs from 7 to 9. So, yeah, we're dealing with young athletes a lot. And so, one of my crazy catches at the moment is raising the bar of education for tennis. I was mentioning to you a moment ago that, Corona, for all of the bad stuff, there was good stuff. And the good stuff for us was that our industry leapfrogged forwards. We really raised the bar in terms of innovation, in terms of new technology that's coming into play. So, yeah, I think all of that now has to become more a part of the younger categories, that, foundational years and then formative years and then on to performance.
I don't disagree at all. I love it. I will say, and I'm not trying to be confrontational, but when you say selective around who your kids are with, you're not letting them. So you mean you have Nick Kyrgios like coaching them all the time?
Well, that would be the last guy. I mean, that's such a sad story.
All right, awesome. Yeah, good. That was my test question to make sure you and I were going to be besties. So, so I think that guy is a complete ass clown. And if he listens to the podcast, he can hear me say so. No, awesome, and I agree. Right, like. As a parent, I'm completely selective on who my kids are around, and it's that development, right? Because it's easy to perform in a fishbowl or a small pond or a large pond, right? And look like a shark walking around and swimming around that pond, gobbling up other things. But there's always a bigger arena, and tennis and soccer are both two sports that are truly global. The numbers are just staggering. My 16-year-old niece plays at Austin Tennis Academy, and she's world class as well. Like she's awesome, and I have a lot of love for the sport. So I love everything that you're saying.
Great program down there, by the way, Scott. Very, very strong program.
Oh no, they love it. So they are. In fact, I might do an email introduction with your permission after this to my sister-in-law, just to say like, hey, for Hannah, if Conrad's got anything. So they're good people. 2 podcasts in a row, Angus. I've got to drop like my brother and sister-in-law. Like, who knows? Who knew? So you said something as well when coronavirus comes about. Innovation is a bit forced, right? And that's one of the things that I keep telling people as well, that there are positives about COVID and coronavirus. Companies around the globe looked at what they were doing and realized that they didn't need these $250,000 offices in a high buildings, and they didn't need all these ping pong tables and nap pods. They just needed to give people an internet connection, a laptop, and a place to work, right? So companies are reevaluating all this stuff as well, and I love that innovation idea within sports, because far too often we think, oh, it's just insert sport here, right? Tennis or soccer or whatever, but there's so much behind the scenes that I love it. And then when you said you went from player to academic, tell me about that leap, like from academic back to coaching. Where did you find that delta of what you saw needed to be done and what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, Scott, that a lot of where we end up with is just, timing, right? And so I came out of high school with a group of kids who were really talented athletes from St. Kevin's College in Melbourne. I don't know if you know it, but renowned for producing athletes. And I came out in an era there where we had a lot of them. And so a lot of us were very interested in sports science. And, I knew that as a professional athlete, I would never be able to make a full living out of it. I'd be able to enjoy doing it for a few years at a low level and then say, right, what now? So I was fortunate, I guess, myself to have a coach when I was in those years, sort of 14, 15, 16 years old, who really impacted me beyond coaching. And I loved what he was doing. And I knew at that point I wanted to be involved in tennis and on an international level with players. I just didn't know how the hell I was going to get there. So luckily for me, sports science had just started, I believe, the year before I came out of secondary school at Deakin University. We had an incredible program. And I was lucky enough to be able to get into that and be one of the few that got in. And when we were there, I just remember the lecturers were David Parkin and some really big names in sport in Australia. And they basically said, look, if you don't have a sport that you major in, that you're really good at, and you have a degree in as a player at some level, it's going to be hard for you to make an inroad into this industry. And so that kind of took me from player, academic, and then pushed me back to play again. So once I was done with that process of getting my degrees and honors and whatnot, I went back and picked up my racket bag and started playing again at, like I said, prize money and low satellite level tennis. And luckily that got me around. I went to Europe, when I'd finished my degree, and I've had two bags, basically. One was my pro bag, ready to go and play, as long as my money would support me. And my other one was my backpack, ready to go and run with the Bulls the minute that I was done, right? And so I did all of that, and it was fun, right? I think the key that I tried to have to all of this was I was serious about what I was doing, but I was always mindful to enjoy the process. And I still am today. It's something that I'm adamant about now, is we can work hard, but we've also got to have a good time doing it. And fortunately, in a sport like tennis, opportunities would present themselves because it's so international, yet so small. I would know someone, or a coach would know someone, and we'd end up kind of connecting through a little mini network that would help with opportunities. And that's how it worked for me. So from player through academics, and then academics, I had a buddy I played with who was in Europe. I traveled with him. Then I went into a club, and I just literally turned up to a great club in North London. I literally was down to my last few bucks, and luckily I'd paid my rent for a couple of months. So I rocked up to a tennis club. It was at David Lloyd up in North Finchley there. And I literally walked into the front desk and said, look, I'd love a job. And they said, oh, you wouldn't believe it. Someone just walked out. We got a junior coaching job. What? All right. So the trial was on. I had to jump out. I had to play a set against a head pro. I was fresh off playing, so I beat the hell out of him, and I had a job, and I was on court 2 hours later earning money. So, that all of that was just kind of, luck for me. And I guess in the education was the difference, right? It was the fact that I had my sports science degree. I had my credentials from Australia, low level, level 1 coaching licenses, but all of that helped me.
And so you said a few things there, which I love, right? Because I say similar things to entrepreneurs and veterans when they're transitioning out about starting up a company or whatever. And one, you were very self-aware of what the future looked like for you, right? And you didn't say, and this is a conversation I have with my 14-year-old, my Barca player all the time, right? Is, look, are you going to be the next Lionel Messi if you do go pro? No. Are you going to be like making Cristiano Ronaldo money? Probably not. But there's a whole lot of other avenues that you can make. And by the way, the average salary for a pro player is a few $100,000 a year. There's a lot worse ways to make a living than kicking the ball around for a couple $100,000 a year. But then you can segue into coaching or other stuff that you want to do in the clubs, right? So, but what happens is far too many of us, I think, put a straight line between like idea and what that opportunity looks like. And then we think it's an absolute straight line. And what you're saying, and I agree with completely, is that line is squiggly and just goes all over the place, right? So it's never perfect, and you have to be adaptable. But one of the things that you said that for anybody who does listen to this, I want them to remember is Conrad you had also checked dotted the I's and crossed the T's as far as setting yourself up for success. Previously, you didn't do it all in a post-mortem kind of forensic look at, oh, I should have gotten a degree. You were doing all of that on driving into what you knew your future looked like within the game. And I think that's powerful on a bunch of different levels for people to hear and think that this is a pro athlete that had gotten the degree in a revolutionary new field and then had adapted and overcame through all this stuff with the right mindset. And so talk to me a little bit more about mindset in games and how you coach to it.
Whoa. I mean, I was saying to Angus just before we came on board that in our sport right now, you need to be a mindset expert. And what I mean by that is it has to be a part, and it was never a part of my own training growing up. It was me seeking out and finding that, hey, I'm interested in this, and this is damn important. But today, I mean, I was just saying to Angus, just yesterday, I run what's called a mentally tough tennis program. And we're really talking about tennis. We're talking about, all of these other things, purpose, attentional focus, committed actions, tolerance, all of the skill sets that go around that. And so that is absolutely quintessential. And I think without me knowing or being trained, or I'm just a very positive person. And so it's something that I just evolved to. And if there's a problem, I kind of sort of see the way out before I see that there's not a way out. And I really feel that has come to me from playing the sport that I played, tennis. It really is a problem-solving sport. And I feel like, mindset training today, mental health, awareness for kids. They talk about burnout. You hear this burnout thing all the time in tennis. And I'm sure it's a global epidemic or pandemic. But for me, it never was a problem because I loved what I was doing. And so that's what I'm trying to bring out to kids today. You nailed it, what you said a moment ago. Most of these kids, they're going to go to college. There's 3 pathways. They're going to go pro. Very, very, very few players. They're going to go to college, play great, then maybe try to play pro, which is what I basically did, and end up in the industry somehow. Or they're going to literally get to college and go in and be experts in other areas. So, the key thing for me is that mindset and positivity and having that kind of constructive approach to every day. It's something you learn as an athlete, whatever the sport is, that you got to get something out of that day. And I really feel like we got to train it. There needs to be formal training for kids that are athletes, and whatever they transition to, we have to address mindset as a topic.
Here's a question for you both, actually, based on around mindset. And you both talked a bit about parenting, coaching, innovation. And I think that the majority of folks really don't comprehend what sport can deliver. And in my own history, I've not just coached it, but I've created jobs, like I call them micro jobs or micro employment. And people are obsessed with the athlete and the win and not thinking about the big picture. So my question for both of you as parent, coach, and player is, what's the role, particularly post-COVID, what is the role of sport today in society?
That's a great question. You want me to shoot, Scott, or you want to go ahead?
Go for it, brother. All yours.
At the end of the day, guys, we all want happiness. We all want wellness. We all want mental health, physical health. I read this recently that health is the new handbag. I think health's been the handbag forever, right? So we've all been into it, but now people are valuing it much more. And, the world has been through a lot. We all know that. And I think just getting up, being positive, being active, getting the heart rate going, getting the blood pumping, we know how we feel after a game. After I play a game, I'm on a high, natural high. And I think that is just so important. And so as a parent, my 2 kids who are very young have very different personalities. One of them is very laissez-faire, is drifting through the earth. My daughter's a real worrywart, right? So I know that sport already at that young age, it's helping her to keep balance. And so as a parent, I can see the benefits. And I got to tell you, I'm a much better coach since I've been a parent than I was prior. Even though I might have thought I was great, I'm much better, as a parent than I before I was. As a coach, see the social interaction, kids, working together, laughing, solving problems together, training hard, pushing each other. Just this morning, we were at our fitness institute where we had 29 kids broken into 4 groups. And, the teamwork, come on, let's go. They're pushing, they're driving each other. That is just so healthy. I mean, I don't care what you say, whether they're great at it or poor at it, they were being supported in a very sort of positive way. And as a player, I mean, we all want to know that we're not alone, right? So if you're pursuing these ambitions with someone else, the group will always help carry the individual that's struggling. Now, that struggling individual may never become something, but as a human being, they're the best version of themselves. And so that's what I think sport's all about.
I was having this conversation just last night. My 14-year-old, again, he plays for Barca, his school team, his middle school team, and he also plays for the Olympic development program. So he's on these 3 teams and trains constantly. And Barca has moved him because they're in the age group until like 8:30 to 10 training type of window, right? Or 8 to 9:30, and he's home by 10 from training. But my wife took him last night, and normally I drive him, and she came back and she said, man, he's a chatterbox after training. Like normally he's, and I said every time, and then we were laughing saying that he just thrives on it so much. And yesterday when he was with chatterbox, he had already played a full school game where he scored a couple goals. He had already come home, like did his dishes, did his homework, did whatever, and then went to Barcelona training and got out at 9:30 and was just full of energy. And it's a constant reminder seeing him at the end of a long day, waking up at 5:45 and finishing training at 9:30 at night, that he's awesome at it. He loves it. And that's what we want to empower him to be more. So, and I keep telling him, if I have to drag you to training, we've lost this battle, dude. Yeah. Like when you quit wanting to go or quit loving it as much as you do, we've lost this battle completely. But again, in tennis is a bit different than soccer because minus doubles, right? Like it's 1v1. You either win or you lose. And that's what I got in trouble in the academy in Australia that I was coaching at. In Tasmania, because I said, no, this is a good academy, and they were run by a former Man United player that played with George Best and everything. But after every game in which my under 18-year-olds would lose, they would come back and say, oh, we had more possession, we played better than them, we did this, and I'm like, hey guys, like those are all excuses, right? So quit making excuses. You lost, they won. Congratulate them and quit sounding like you're being bitter at it. It's passive aggressive, it's nonsense, and I'm not listening to it anymore at all. Like the score at the end of the day, now you played well, but we need to improve, right? So where do you see, how do you coach a youngster in getting excuses out of their vocabulary, right? So
yes, like if I could solve that in a day, I'd tell you, mate, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys. I'd be on a helicopter somewhere. But look, that is the secret, right? That is the secret right there, is realizing what is the truth, being okay with the truth, being accepting of what's happening, and being realistic with the fact that we can't be on a natural ascending trajectory. There are moments in time where we're going to plateau and dip. And so those players whose minds immediately go to those sort of automatic thoughts and feelings that we all have, you got to coach them out of that. And that's where I think when I mentioned earlier, having the right people around impressionable aged kids is so critical. I mean, I'm so selective of, and I'll be straight up. I've put coaches in line with my own kids who I know don't have the greatest coaching skills, but they are incredible human beings. And so that is going to, at the end, help my kids to become honest, realistic in their appraisals and assessments. And at the end of the day, what I try to develop with all athletes is a decompression moment, right? Which is we're all building up, we're training hard, it's all intense, and we're constantly rambling away, getting through what do we got to do this weekend, blah, blah, blah. We play that match. We need a down day. We need a silent day. We need a reflective day. We need a day to go back inward to, I'm big on journaling. I'm big on, keeping a diary. I'm big on even some kids today in this new world we live in, I get them to send me a voice message, which is a reflective process, just so that they get that internal look. And then, now we can build on that. And when I start hearing excuses and whatnot, I actually quite often will say, I think you need another day, another reflective day. Let's get back to it on Tuesday, right? So, yeah, it's not easy, especially in a sport like what I am involved in, where parents are paying a ton of bucks. Especially in an academy, for example, private academy where it's very expensive. It's not cheap. We know that. Versus a team sport, which maybe is much cheaper and much more affordable. You probably sideline people a little longer to help them get into the mental side. For us, every hour that's lost, parents think, well, it's an hour that's gone. But I really like to put the value in the out of the arena time, sitting down time, reflecting, discussing. And unfortunately in the sport of tennis, a lot of people don't have that. So what they do is I call it the baggage. Their suitcase just gets heavier and heavier and heavier until it's busting at the seams. So the only way we're going to, relieve that is to take it out. And I wish that we had more time for that.
No, so I have a loaded question, and it's only loaded because I'll preface the question, so I'm not ambushing you like I did Darby on the last podcast I was on. So apologies again, Darby, if you're listening to this. Selection of kids, right? So I'm a former Green Beret, and to go to training to become a Green Beret, you go through SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection, and you get told at the end, you guys go over there, you guys go over here, you made it, you didn't, see you next time, right? Or maybe not see you next time. In the academies, and you said academies is what piqued my brain on this, right? The academies like Barca and the other academies that I've been on are better at doing that as well, but talk to me from a more educated point of view, right? Because you're doing a lot of individual stuff. When somebody just isn't ready for that next step yet, how do you put the corrective actions in place and tell them and deliver bad news? Because you can't build a tier 1 team or a tier 1 player if you don't select the right things and get them to the right areas, right? So how do you maintain standards and deliver bad news to parents and everybody else? Because I think America needs to hear this, that not everybody is the next Roger Federer.
It's a really good question. And, I've got to say, I'm very good at delivering the truth. And so I do it in a way where I'm very prepared. I'll never go into that type of meeting without a strategy or a plan in the hand. And so a lot of the time, what I say to parents, especially in tennis, is the moment comes where it's a fork in the road, right? And it's going to happen often, especially in tennis, where the sport never gets easier. That's something that we've got to realize. Every year, every age, every stage, there's a better level, right? And there's a better round, and there's a number 1 seed, and then there's a higher ranking. And this happens until you're Novak Djokovic. It's going to happen every single week. So we got to be realistic. And so part of what I do is I formulate what I call personal programs, which will pull a player out of a mass sort of a rack program, which might be an academy program, let's say, training, let's say 4 days a week. That's not servicing our needs. All right. You have a higher need for what you're trying to achieve. We need to look in a different way. And the way to do that is to personalize a little bit more. So we might break it down. We break down the week. Okay. We're doing a lot of group time. We're not doing enough private time. We need to add a private in here. We're doing, a lot of physical time. We're not doing enough mental time. Let's do this. Let's add that in. What I can see is you're training a lot, but you're not competing enough. And so what I'll do, the beauty of a sport like tennis is at the national level, there's a lot of research. And so we could, simply find in Australia, what are the kids who are top kids at 14 and under, 16 and under, what does their weekly program look like? And then do a comparison. So I tackle it from a strategic standpoint. I use, the information that's at hand, and I let the parents know that, everyone obviously develops at different times. And so it's a hard conversation often because we're also often talking about dollars, right? So it becomes expensive. A sport like tennis, we all know the numbers. You could be spending up to 75, 100 grand a year if you're really all in on your kid.
They said something which I think, Angus, we might need to name this episode, right? Which is, it only gets harder from here. And sadly, that's something that I don't talk to kids about. And when you said it, I went, good Lord, right? Like if you're not performing well here, I'm doing you a disservice by sending you here, because you're absolutely not going to perform well at that level. And it only gets harder from this point, right? And I think that's a great life lesson in business as well, that it's not just in tennis or soccer, but it only gets harder from right where you are. We're trying to scale our own company into the next levels, and we have a couple academic partnerships, universities, and more coming along, but it's been a rough ride, and I constantly get slapped in the face, at every step that I take. It's like one step forward, 2 steps back, but just being resilient. So I love that helps across, but it only gets harder from here. It resonated with me. So thank you for that.
Well, I think, Scott, you just nailed something there. And I was thinking exactly the same thing as you were talking and Conrad was talking. Is business does the same. It gets people coasting along, right? Be like us, be one of us, conform. And then they shove them into these environments with zero preparation. Right. And it's a senior, like junior to senior leadership or senior to executive leadership. So you're going like tier 3 to tier 2 to tier 1, and they expect them to perform with absolutely no prep, nothing. And then they wonder why they're stressed or they fall down or their marriages break apart and all this kind of stuff. And it's to me, it's an absolute no-brainer. And one of the things, coming back to Conrad, what you were saying about forks in the road, and I've met a few forks. I remember when I left high school, right? For my area where I grew up was a good high school. Then I got to my first job and realized I knew nothing about the world, right? And sport was the driver, got me evolving. It became my intentional learning. But then that wasn't enough, so I joined the military. And that was the next stage because, like you, Conrad, you were driving your own path. And then the military took me back to college. Then college took me to China and so on and so forth. Got really interesting, and it sort of is another loaded question, Conrad, sorry. But the question about telling people the truth, okay, and it's very interesting. If you look at rugby over here, rugby's really struggling. There's been an influx of foreigners, some of whom serve the purpose, but a lot of whom I think in the US in rugby are here for mercenary purposes. They're just building up their resume so they can move on, but they're not really leaving anything behind. And that's, to my mind, is playing up to the national level, for the national athlete level. Now, without naming names, you and I were just discussing that you're bringing in a coach to your environment from another, who's not from around these parts, shall we say. So what can foreign coaches bring to sports leadership or leadership in general that American coaches don't have? And what do American coaches have that we can maybe extract and give over to the other side? But where I'm coming to is you just generally, particularly in the coaching arena, it's just all zero sum, right? Americans have the best athletes until they don't. Americans have the best coaches till they don't. Foreigners are good at this, they're good at soccer, but they're like, and we're all on a par with tennis and golf. It's just such a weird mix of emotional, subjective behaviors. So anyway, the question was, is, what does a foreign coach bring to the American sporting leadership arena and vice versa?
That's such a great question. And I'm coming up to my end of fourth year in the US. And I can tell you, there are some absolutely astonishingly brilliant coaches that I've met and seen. And I've seen the absolute opposite of that. And so part of that, in my opinion, and again, I don't have any science or research to prove this other than my opinion and probably interviewing 200 coaches in that time. A lot of people come out of college and the college sports system, and they went in as a low-level athlete and they graduate or don't graduate. Now they spill into the sport as a coach. And so in America, in the tennis industry, definitely you get a lot of guys who fall into coaching. It's not what they wanted to do. They didn't plan on doing that. And, there was a need for someone who had an interest in the sport. And so they become a coach. I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of my missions is to raise the bar on coaching. It always has been. Here in the US, that is a big problem. What I do know is countries that are smaller, Spain, Australia, England, in terms of the tennis communities, the requirements, and they actually there are laws in place as a tennis coach who you can and cannot work with. Here, that doesn't exist. And so you see these uber talented kids that really need coaching, working with a guy that hit a ball well back in 1998, and now he's their coach because he played okay back then. Formal training is so important. And here in the National Association, I got to be a little careful what I say, but it's a little bit disjointed in that for example, in Australia, we have the National Association. In England, you have the LTA, we have Tennis Australia. That is the board, that is the authority, that is the standard. In the US, you've got 3-4 different organizations that are still trying to work out who is actually in charge. And, for one period of 3 years, these guys are. And then something changes, now those guys are. Now, hang on, those guys are. And no one's really taking responsibility for it. So I feel like that's one major reason, Angus, why in my industry, coaching is struggling in the US. I want to repeat, I've met incredible coaches, but the vast majority have been so far below the level that they need to be. Hence why, at the moment, I could show you my list just behind me. I've got 8 guys that I've talent ID'd that I would love to hire, bring them in. I've got, a guy from Spain, a guy from England, a guy from Australia, a couple guys from Latin America, simply because they are at the highest educated, qualified level that they could possibly be at. Now, you bring that into an environment like we have here where, I think right now, if you drew a circle 300 miles around where I'm sitting, it's the most densely populated, competitive tennis area in the world. So in terms of captive audience, kids that are playing high school level, national level, junior varsity level, man, we've got players everywhere. And so what's missing is coaches that are thriving on the opportunity to develop that talent. And so normally when you're bringing in, someone from one of those countries I mentioned earlier, not only are they very, very educated, but they are desperate for an opportunity to have kids that are hungry to perform. And so that for me is really where it comes from. And, Angus, you and I spent a lot of time in China, where I can tell you that it was not too dissimilar. We did not have a lot of quality coaches, but we had a lot of kids with potential. And so that anyone that I sort of found worked well in that environment with such limited resources, were able to do a great job, would only thrive in this environment in the US.
I was going to say, I have a saying that I tell people all the time when I look at coaches, which is, if you take those who can't do, the normal saying is those who can't do teach, right? But here it seems to be those who can't do coach. Those who never thrived, the has-beens or the never wases, or all of a sudden the subject matter experts. And I get laughed at all the time because in Australia, right? Australia beats the hell out of the US in a lot of things, like you just said. And one of the things is I'm a C licensed coach internationally because I was forced to undergo that in Australia. So I've had a conversation with a couple parents at my son's middle school when they're like, oh, you're kind of vocal during the game and, let the coach whatever. I'm like, I am a coach. When I say these things, and I'm a higher rated coach than the football coach sitting over there on the sidelines, the American football coach playing English football or coaching English football, nonetheless. And
that's a good point. I can say one thing really fast. My wife laughs at me all the time because I'm a qualified, believe it or not, cricket, baseball, volleyball, basketball, swimming. I'm a licensed qualified coach. I never use it. I've never used it. But in order to become what I am in the tennis industry in Australia, and to have a sports science degree that I had, we had to do those things. And so learning from all of those different areas, the way that they coach, it helped to form my own philosophy. My philosophy as a coach is very simple. It's never changed. Teach what's essential, encourage what's natural, allow for every individual. And that has been I wake up to that mantra. I mean, it's on everything that I do. I live and breathe it. But I learned a lot of that from other sports that I was never, ever going to work in. But it was just so great to have that. And I wish that was happening here in the US a little bit.
Well, and that's one of the things as well. In special forces, we say add another tool to your rucksack, right? And one of the things, even if it's being a baseball coach does nothing for you professionally or earns $1 for you ever, if you pull one little thing out of that and just throw it in your bag that you may ever toss out to a player in need, right? All of those things make you unique. And when Angus asked you what your value as a foreign Australian coach on US soil is, Angus, that's how we developed our master classes, right? Problem offering differentiators, right? The model that we look for every master class is what problem are we solving? What's our offering to solve that problem? And what's the differentiator? So we call it the POD model internally. And you, as an Australian coach on American soil, that differentiator is massive. And I think that's a lot of the reasons that you're succeeding in the mental game as much as you are. So
I think that Scott, and I agree. And also I'm going to sort of throw it back at both of you. We're 3 fairly objective, rational adults and professionals. sport is just so full of subjective.
We're middle-aged white males, brother. We're evil. Like, what are you talking about? We're evil. We're the wrong in the world right now. Come on.
But it's that correlation of objectivity trying to sort of break through this emotional subjective issue. And it's listening to what Australia's done. And you look at the US, and sport is such a part of the cultural identity of the US. You'd think people would like embrace structural build, embrace professionalism. And I've been around. Rugby's just broken. It's completely dislocated. And whilst there's some really good brains, and there's some really good people desiring. My wife's my biggest defender. And she's a US citizen. And she goes into I bring her to coaching meetings with me, and she gets really mad at American coaches because she said, "My husband's like a PhD in this game, and you're like a community college, and all he wants to do is help you build, right?" But there's this weird thing about the emotional. Let's call it shame. I don't know if that's the right word, but the emotional piece. Then there's this thing about volunteerism. Volunteerism is a great thing, but there seems to be like this sort of underlying cultural no quid pro quo. All right, I'll come down and give you 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever, pro bono, and going to help you build your program or whatever. But what's the quid pro quo here? And they go, "Oh, you should just do it for the love of it." Now that left the UK round about the early 90s across all sports. So there's a big problem out there. Give me a couple of pointers for both of you. And I know, Scott, you've probably got to eject soon. And Conrad, you're double busy, so you've probably got to eject soon. So what would be the solution? What would be the solutions for objectivity breaking through subjectivity?
Wow, great question. Scott, you want to launch? You want me to go?
You go. I'm gonna have to bounce because I've got a team of people waiting for me and somebody whose time is sensitive. So I hate to be rude and avoid the question, but Conrad, I love meeting you. I'm gonna be in touch more and more. I connected with you on LinkedIn, so thank you so much for the time today. Angus, I hate to be this guy, but I'm gonna have to bounce. You guys can continue talking and wrap it up. But
we'll close it out and we'll talk about you when you're gone.
All right, see you guys.
Good on you, Scott. Look, Angus, I'm going to come back to my pillars, right? And my pillars are education, experience. I think there's no substitute for those two things combined. Open-mindedness. I think going out learning. I think being mentored. Not always having to be the mentor. I've always had someone who is around that I can lean on, question, spend time with. That's always helped me, whether it be business building or whether it be coaching or whether it be anything else. And so for me, that's the objectivity that's required. It's putting those tools in the bag through doing the time, right? And so volunteerism, I agree with you. It's a great thing, but all too often because of the need, some of those volunteers get thrusted up and they're just not equipped for what they need to do in certain sports. But US is just such a different landscape. It really is. I'm just amazed how there are programs everywhere. Everywhere I go, there's a football program over here and a tennis program over there, and guys running academies in parks that the guy can't. Who is the guy, right? It's one guy, and it's called an academy, and they're charging huge bucks for these services. So, I just would like more standards in place. I think, protocols and just, minimum expectations and minimum levels of qualification through education are the key.
Yeah. Joe, it's so interesting you could take out tennis, say rugby. I know it's just when I was doing governance and it's just these academies pop up and the number of parents I spoke to and they go, "Oh, well, my son or my daughter's in so-and-so's academy." And I said, "Why is it an academy?" And they go, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what are you paying for? Where are they taking your players to? Where do they sit on welfare? Biomechanical development, chronological age versus athlete development, athlete age." And the parents just stare at me and I go, "Come on, you're paying these people good money. What are you getting back out of that spend?" And it's a really interesting cultural dynamic in my mind because other parts of the world wouldn't spend any money until they like gone under the hood and looked at everything. And it was quite interesting. I had and I'd be interested to see how you deal with parents. I know you mentioned earlier about the relevance of parents and dealing with parents, but I remember having one conversation with a mother and saying, would you ever buy a car or a house from an unlicensed professional without doing any checks or without any checks and balances in place? They go, no, never. I said, so you respect those assets more than the health of your child or the well-being of your child, do you? And the mums just go,
Yeah.
and a lot of the dads just sort of shrug it off and go, yeah, whatever, sport is, sport.
I think, Angus, people get institutionalized very quickly with whether it be branding or logoing or marketing. You do have to go one step further. And, my kids go to a private school, and I expect that those teachers are really qualified. They're really experienced, and, they've done what they need to do, and they're the best the best version of themselves is what they're aspiring to. And when it's not the case, you see those teachers not around for long. Now, a tennis academy is no different. You're paying for top private, instruction, but it's more than instruction. It's guidance, it's mentoring, it's advising, it's kind of facilitating a lot of the time. So it is important that we do, I think, go a little further, find out a little bit more about who is the coach, what have they done? One of the first questions I ask any coach that asks me for a job, what association, what recognized association are you a member of? How long have you been a member of that? What are your qualifications other than academic? And I'm just shocked in the US, very, very few coaches are actually current members of an association. So, and again, in Australia, it's mandatory. You don't have that. You are not permitted to collect $1 from coaching.
Well, and I think I don't know about football, so soccer ball. I'm going to call it soccer ball. I don't know where that sits, but I do remember in terms of cultural identity, anecdotally, I think the Bundesliga, right, soccer ball is so intrinsic to the identity of German society and all the way through to World Cup performance that, like you just said there, you come through, they've gone through, the whole ecosystem enables a young coach to actually, once they've jumped through those hoops and got their standards up, to earn like 30, 40,000 euros a year, right? Because they say this is so important to the fabric of our society. Why would we expect them to do it for free? Particularly when the athletes and the development of the athletes is so important. Now that to me just blows my mind. That's like, I suppose, a very Germanic approach to industry, but the recognition of professionalism. But equally, it's just it's something that sort of resonates with me very deep down, because if the coaches who want to be good have got nowhere to go, right, then there's no reason for them to try and aspire to be better, is there?
I think you said it perfectly there. I mean, the step ladder, to get better, you've got to work at getting better. Whether you're the athlete, the coach, it's a conscious, deliberate, committed decision that you're really going to spend more time to become better at your craft. And especially in my sport, there's so many different approaches and methodologies. You need to have your own strong foundation, and that can only come through time spent, time learning from those who have more experience or a different experience, listening and then filtering and coming up with your own way. I do have to say there have been some efforts made here in the US in the time that I've been here to improve the system. And I think it really was disjointed, and it is getting a little bit better. And I just hope that through Corona and through everything that's happened, a lot of coaches lost their income. A lot of coaches were immediately unable to earn and move forwards in life. And so a lot of them were forced to go back to the drawing board and study and get better at what they do. So that's a real positive that's happened out of that poor period of time. And I just hope that we just continue to drive the industry further forwards with education and with those standards in place.
Yes, and actually that brings us, and we're coming close to the end of the time here. So you and I were discussing earlier a little bit about sport and innovation, right? And I look at my own sport of choice, and there's so much room to innovate, like so much on field and off field. And post-COVID, it's a great time. If there ever was a time for change, it's post-COVID. So in turn, what do you think right now? and again, we'll probably skim over this, and I'd love to get you on for a second show sometime in 2022. But what do you think are the most exciting innovations coming up in tennis that you can speak to?
Yeah, look, I think I mentioned earlier that I was kind of at the very start of this science side coming into the sport of tennis. It was very artistic prior to that. And so sports science is just right now leaps and frogs. I was mentioning earlier, there's a software that's come onto the market that's kind of becoming the national software, where the designers of this were, one of them was from Tesla, one of them was from Apple, and they had a bit of time and they had been college tennis players, right? So came up with this incredible video-based learning software, which I don't think would have come to the market if Corona didn't happen. So that's one. And the other one, I think, is, like I mentioned, also mental programs, right? So we run a mentally based program through a sports psychologist doctor in Australia named Dr. Anthony Ross, phenomenal sports psychologist. But because of Zoom and all this virtual learning, remote learning, we've been able to deliver that program here in New Jersey, which is just phenomenal. The other innovations that are really happening in tennis are to do with data, right? So there's just so much data now. We can analyze everything from number of steps taken, meters running, are the players preferentially moving left or right? And so, we're able to really break it down and dissect the game much more than we were. I have athletes that love that. I have athletes that just can't handle that. So, and then it comes back to the coaching, right? So who are you going to give this information to versus who you're not going to give it to, and coach them in a way that they can use the information you've gathered thanks to the innovative new methods, but delivery comes back to the coach, right? So,
yep.
Yeah. Last week, I think I mentioned to you, there was the Tennis Business Global Innovation Conference, 1,500 coaches from around the world on this 4-day, just all about innovation, everything that's on the market now. You couldn't have done that before Corona, so that's very exciting too.
So last question then, and you just really rung a bell for me, right? Data helps improve performance, but it also puts players under massive scrutiny. And you're just talking about innovations in mental health, which is really, I'm a big fan of psychological safety, giving people room for reflection and trying to get an older generation to understand that modern generations of players are under different pressures. So you've got, I'm going to throw out a tabloid headline, Naomi Osaka, right, as a case in point. He just said enough is enough, and fair play to her. I thought I was quite impressed by her strength of character, to be honest, probably because I'm quite a sympathetic and empathetic person, because I have some kind of feeling of what modern athletes are going through. Everyone's into their life all the time. So I think the question I'm coming to is, you've mentioned about your own mental health program that you've innovated. Give us a real feel. So let's look at it this way. Let's finish on a high in creating empathy for athletes, right, who are really under scrutiny all the time. How do we create that empathy with the consumer group? How do we let people know that they really are under the pump?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many stories, right? You got Simone Biles, it just happened in the Olympics. You got Osaka back in Australia. You got Phelps, Thorpe, all these. Marty Fish just released a video or movie on Netflix. I mean, it's a reality of playing sport at the highest level. These guys, they're under the pressure, just is so strong that there needs to be decompression. And I mentioned earlier, we can build that into a weekly routine at a formative age group if you focus on it. I think the big word there is culture, right? So what culture do you harvest in your organization or in your sport? Are you open to dealing with these problems? Are you creating enough downtime for players to process what they're going through? Because we all know the come down after an Olympics, for an example, is just massive for these athletes. In America, in the gymnastics arena, they've been talking a lot about these athletes that, they come off that competitive cycle. They need education to acclimatize back to normal eating, normal habits, normal health. So I think culture is the key, and it's all about what culture you develop in your organization. I think we have to absolutely consider mental health on track with or on par with physical well-being. It's often overlooked, not spoken about. What we've done here at our program is I've put a master in charge of female athletes, a master in charge of male athletes, and I ask them to, there's no diary or calendar on it, but I ask them to get together in their small groups every couple of weeks, go and have lunch together in a quiet space and just talk, right? And make it a totally open space. What's happening at home? That's another thing that we deal with in tennis that most other sports don't have, is that the home environment can often be mentally more intense and more challenging than the actual training environment. Mm-hmm. So, we talk about that, how things going at home, how things going with school, how things going personally. We're trying to give players the voice. And so we've also implemented here at Centercourt a holistic development program, which is aimed at players learning how to communicate. Because today, what it's all about, phones, devices, messaging, etc. We're trying to actually get players to learn how to use their voice. And so we might only be just scratching the surface, but I think we're opening the door on something that is, bigger and really important for these players once they get into a college environment or a pro environment, and then post their playing days, getting back to normal human life. So culture, mate, the word for me is culture.
That's a phenomenal response. I could go on this subject for hours, and it's something that's been coming to my mind recently, talking about cultural and sporting differences. And I just think, I think that some people out there in the world believe like going, earning your living as an athlete or as going in the sports arena is an easy option in life because it's not like real industry. But it isn't. I think that's a myth we need to bust as part of the cultural improvement, isn't it?
Completely. I mean, just recently, one of our athletes, he won Wimbledon Juniors, right? And that is no mean feat. You go back and have a look at the list of guys who won Wimbledon and who they become. The way that he stepped up and just played was indicative of his culture, his family, the support of his parents. The way he thought about that, it was an opportunity. He went in under expecting, like he didn't go in there thinking, oh my gosh, this is the one and only time. He went in and thought, well, look where I am. If I can do something on this stage, wow, what an opportunity that I've taken. And so that's all coming back to perspective, right? And that perspective is built in the training. It's built in the day-to-day drills. It's built in the moments between drills, walking from car to court and driving from facility to facility. And again, it comes down to the coach. And I'll finish with what I started. The type of characters you're putting around these people. They're in formative years. They're in years where they're being, created as human beings. You got to have good people around athletes, I think, in those young years that help to put those foundations and pillars in place.
Awesome. Conrad, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to see you again. Great to talk to you again. I love the fact that we still resonate on so many issues. And man, I hope your year end brings you everything you want.
Angus, mate, appreciate it. Thank you to you and to Scott. I really enjoyed that. And again, anytime you're around, I'd love to catch up with you fellas and have a cold beer.
Awesome. Well, you're on.